Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in today's video, sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, we're going to talk about the new role of CJ and Bertrand, because I did a bunch of testing with them, putting them through their paces with their new reworks. Bertrand now does combo damage. CJ now does smite damage. Are they meta? And if you're subscribed to the channel, you know that I always have timestamps, so you can jump to whichever part you'd like. And if you're not subscribed, consider smashing that subscribe button. It supports my channel tremendously, and I really appreciate your support. So let's start by giving you a conclusion up front, which is that if you just want the quick answer of are Bertrand and CJ meta, I would say for players using 2 infantry marches or 2 cavalry marches, the answer is no. I wouldn't put them at meta. But I do think they're extremely good if you run 3 infantry marches or you run 3 cavalry marches. And we'll talk about exactly what those combinations will be further along in the video. We need to kick this thing off by talking about the test methodology. I went into a balanced practice match for Ark of Osiris, which lets me have untalented equipment for all the commanders, which lets me have the legendary inscriptions for all the slots for whatever formation I wanted. And so, of course, I used Arthur primary and Bertrand secondary to test cavalry. I used what is considered to be the meta gear. That's the KVK weapon and helmet, the set, chest, and boots. And of course, we've got the Ash of the Dawn and Navarre's Control. All right. I also used a ring and horn on literally every march in testing. For the infantry, I also used what is considered to be the meta set. It's this over here, except I used ring and horn on every one of these marches. So that's the KVK weapon and helmet, the Hope Cloak and Eternal Night, and also the set, gloves, and boots for infantry. Now, there's actually other equipment you could be using, so we could talk about that more later, but big picture, this is what I used. Okay, so I also used pincer on all of the smite commanders. So whoever was the primary had the pincer formation. They had all the legendary inscriptions associated with this formation. All right. For the combo commanders, of course, I used the combo formation. Okay. And they had all the legendary inscriptions for the combo formation. So this is really like the upper end of what can be done. And that's what I wanted to showcase here. The only thing that's missing is like special talents and iconic tiers on equipment, but big picture, it does, I think, the thing we needed to do. I will point out, however, that the combo commanders would scale more than other commanders with the higher tier of equipment, specifically the combo basic attacks trigger all kinds of abilities that are very powerful. So, for example, if we had this Furious Strike, it could get triggered more, okay, which we don't. The ability on the pants, what does that do? Wily. Whenever you launch a basic attack, you can reduce the next smite skill combo attack damage. You have a higher chance of triggering that, and that's very powerful. The level 5 abilities here are very powerful. So there is that one flaw with testing in a balanced mode. But like, I'd rather have everything be perfectly equal and test like that than have other weird variables interfering with the result, all right? Which brings us to the results. And I think these results were a little surprising. Bertrand was shockingly good considering how low his damage factor is. Again, I don't think he's meta. He's not in your top 2 marches for the open field for combo, but he would go into a 3rd march, okay? So in this first test, we're testing against BQ Liuche, and we lose. And BQ Liuche is basically the best march in the game, in my opinion. So the fact that Arthur with Bertrand did decently here is pretty impressive. Keep in mind that both of these accounts have the infantry civilization. So the BQ army does have the special unit here, and they also have a little bit of extra stats. They were France, all right? Then we look at the next report, and oh my God, Arthur Bertrand got crushed by BQ Liuche. Now you might look at this and think, oh, okay, end of story. I don't need to see anything else. Remember, there's randomness that happens in these battles, and you have to test, honestly, if you wanted any sort of significance, like dozens of times. I try to do at least 3. But 71,500 to 32,000, you might take away from this, well, this army sucks, would never run it. But then 58,000 to 43,000. Okay, it is losing. But when I took a closer look at these reports, I realized that sometimes Bertrand does really, really well, and sometimes he does really poorly relative to other attempts. And I started to wonder, why is that the case? Like, why would you have a 72,000 report and then over here a 58,000 report, right? Like the difference here is like massive, like a 40,000 difference versus a 15,000 difference. And when I look at Bertrand's kit, I realized he's got something very unusual going on. And when I looked in the log, I discovered some things that were really surprising, okay? So if we look at Bertrand, okay, he's going to do some combo damage. It's AoE damage, by the way, which is really cool. And also, he's going to make the target lose rage, which is a very powerful effect. So he's manipulating the enemy's rage. He gets attack and health and reduces the damage he takes. He's going to do more normal damage. He's got a chance to launch combo attacks, which is really cool because we have all this combo synergy. And then here's where things get spicy. If this commander is attacking a field troop, whenever you deal combo damage, you have a 20% chance to increase the rage requirement of the target's active skills by 100. Now, we'll go and look in the logs here, but I believe it was a 40% chance when expertised. I'm a little confused. We'll look at the log. So increase the rage requirement of the target's active skill by 200. And if the target is already affected by a rage requirement increase, you drain 20 rage from them. Now, this could trigger multiple times per turn. So you could do some kind of funky stuff here, draining rage, and I was really surprised when I looked in the report. This commander's troop takes 5% less damage and deals 10% more combo attack damage when they have less than 60% of units remaining. Now, the thing that I found so surprising when I looked in the log is like, oh, the target loses 10 rage or 20 rage. No, it drains the rage. It's a vampire. It literally takes the rage off of them and puts it onto you, which sounded really, really cool, and I think is a part of the reason these reports get so swingy sometimes, because Arthur has a bunch of ways to do combo damage, Bertrand has a bunch of ways to do combo damage, which means you can have an incredibly high uptime on the debuff that makes the rage requirement higher, which means as you go in and you're hitting them, you could drain a ridiculous amount of rage off of them, and take that rage for yourself. So when I look at this report over here, and we go to the first active skill, we can actually see this in action. So Arthur does his AoE damage, okay, which is a bunch of combo attacks. We got an unbelievable number of triggers of Horn of Fury, 2 of those. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 triggers of Undying Fury. So that is a lot. Ring of Doom procs, okay. And as we go through here, we're not done yet. Okay, no quarter triggered 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So many combo attacks. And Bertrand's 4th skill triggered 4 times. We're gaining us another 80 rage, and they lose 80 rage. This is why I think that Bertrand is so swingy. Like, if you're hitting the same target and you can get this to affect them, it is crazy. I think the reality, though, of Open Field and Rise of Kingdoms is that that's often not going to be the case, and you're often hitting many different targets. So theoretically, like if lots of people were using these effects that made it so that targets had a higher rage requirement, this could really pop off. I don't really think it's there. But the fact that like you get turns like this is really gross. Now, I will take this opportunity to point out that there's a rage limitation in the game, a rage limitation of 220 per turn that you can gain. So when we're gaining 80 over here and 60 over here and a bunch over here, like we're overraging, and overrage doesn't do anything. You still at most are only gaining 220 rage in a turn. So I think this drain effect on during an active skill cycle ends up being less powerful. But when you pair with a commander like Arthur, okay, who has an opportunity here at the start of the battle to do a bunch of combo attacks, okay, and then you could, increase their rage requirement from Bertrand, right? Like maybe there's some synergy here with all these extra combo attacks where you can do something cool, making yourself sort of like generate rage and make them lose rage as you build up to the first skill cycle. But that was my guess as to why it was performing well, or not well, but better in some cases than others in these duels, okay? Arthur Bertrand here against Cavalry. Honestly, a surprisingly solid result. And again, I think this is because of the rage manipulation. Against Huo Arthur. I mean, Huo Arthur is a monster of a march, and we're talking about 45 to 39. Like, that's really close, all things considered. Still losing, though. Against archers, winning 29-6 to 43. Against cavalry again, and you're maybe wondering, why am I staggering these? You got to wait the 30 seconds for Huo to sort of warm up before you battle with him because of his third skill. 48,000 to 36,000. Right? Not terrible into Huo, but like still losing, right? Winning again against the archers, 29-7 to 46-5. And then battling again into the cavalry, 47 to 36. All right. So, long story short here. We got archers again, 33 to 41. Long story short here is that, Bertrand did fine, but he's probably getting a lot of advantage for being in this dueling situation compared to regular poke fest open field fighting. It is possible he is more performant there. And to try to understand that, I just wanted to compare, how does something like Arthur Phillip do in these duels? Because people would say Arthur Phillip is an extremely good open field march, and it still loses to BQ Liu Che, but not by as much, which is noteworthy. People would say, and I would tell you, that Arthur William is the meta Arthur combination in the open field. And this lost 64-7 to 30,000. Now, there's a couple things going on here with William that make him so good in the open field, but terrible in a duel. One is that when he hits multiple targets, he buffs your team with defense and rage. The other is that he's got this major instant proc damage. Now, you've also got a bunch of instant proc stuff going on with Bertrand and its combo stuff, which is extremely synergistic with Arthur. So the point I'm trying to make by showing you this is that Bertrand's performance in the open field is obviously not going to be totally reflected in a duel context, because a commander like William performs outstanding in the open field. One of my favorite marches in the game is Arthur William, and it gets wrecked in duels. So I just wanted to show you that. Okay, here again, 53 to 34. Just because a duel result is bad does not mean that Bertrand would be bad in the open field. Now, comparing for a moment Bertrand and William, the effect of Bertrand is not nearly as big as the effect of William, right? It's just not even the same universe. Being able to go in with William and give 20% defense for 3 seconds to 5 allies and give 50 rage per second for 3 seconds, this is a god tier ability. I've been saying that for ages. People finally caught on and they started using William again. It is extremely powerful and offsets how weak his active skill is, not to mention that he's got a museum buff, by the way. So William is the stronger commander to use. But I will point out that William also does terrible in duels, but is great in the open field, okay? Now, Bertrand, I think, would be fine if you're using 3 marches. This is my conclusion for the Bertrand. 3 marches in the open field, and I would put Bertrand in the lineup. And I do think that, one day when Bertrand shows up in the museum and CJ shows up in the museum, we could be having a very interesting conversation about what those buffs are and if they're enough. Typically, I would say they are not enough to move a commander from off meta to meta. And the thing that would be probably necessary to take a commander from off meta to meta would be to have 3 tiers of the museum buff, or 2 tiers of the museum buff, like we have with Charles Martel, right? Like, Charles Martel remains meta because 3 tiers of this museum buff is insane. So, like, sure, if we could put another 60% of stats onto like Bertrand or CJ, like, they go from off meta to meta, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that's how that would work out. So we're probably not going to see that, though. What we will probably see when they do get a museum buff is just 1 tier. So if you invest in Bertrand in the early game, he will have a solid role in the end game in a pair with Arthur, but that is not meta. Now, this brings us to CJ, and people are probably like, oh my God, Chisgule, it took you forever to start to talk about CJ. But, like, I would strongly recommend, again, if you're subscribed to the channel, use the timestamps, jump to whichever part you'd like, all right? So now let's talk about CJ, who performed incredibly well, way better than I expected. So CJ does AoE damage. So this is a double AoE damage dealing combo. So is this one. But CJ won. Like literally the very first duel I did, CJ beat the Liu Chat, and I could not believe it. But once again, this has to do with timing and dueling in a way that surprised me, okay? So when we look at CJ's skills, we can go to the troop buffs here. He now has a silence on the target. If the target has less than 30% of units remaining, they're also silenced for a second when he uses his active skill. This is a pretty big deal. And, you know, as the fight drags on, that effect is incredibly powerful. So if it's anywhere close, like once he starts silencing targets, that's kind of massive. Also, when launching basic attacks, he has a chance to cleanse debuffs from himself, which feels pretty major as well. This cleanse is probably going to be very overlooked. All right. So if we get a look here, this report's very good. We win. I couldn't believe it. Then we lost, though. 38,000 to 37,000. This is very close, though. Like, these reports were insanely close. I mean, honestly, like, the fact that this is performing so well is kind of jaw-dropping. Okay. BQ CJ defeated by BQ Liu Chat, but barely. 38,000 to 36.5. Like, this is a very, very close report. And my takeaway about CJ is that although this is close, better is still better. Okay, better is still better. BQ Liu Chat is, in my opinion, better. Okay, and you're probably using, for two armies, BQ with Liu Chat and Ragnar with Skippy. And this is why I said, even though CJ is very, very good, he is still third March territory if we're talking about how he falls in the meta and pecking order. So even though CJ is definitely better performing than Bertrand, and not by a little, I would argue, the funny thing about that is that infantry are just so busted right now that, like, he still doesn't make the cut. Anyways, we tried out CJ Liu Chat. This was not as strong. 44.5 to 34.5. Okay, then we did it again. 43 to 28. So the BQ Liu Chat is just cooking here. We tried out CJ with William. Okay, 43 to 33. Then we tried the CJ William again, 42 to 31. So it's not amazing. Then we tried CJ with Philip. This was not good. There's really not synergy here much at all. The synergy with Liu Chat and Philip is the combo attacks, giving you extra activations of instant proc damage on Philip. The other thing is that you really need to run this with the Philip as the primary. We did not have Philip geared up, so you could probably get a better result here, and it might be more impressive. But anyways, we're looking at 45.8 to 24. Then over here, 31.1 to 53.5 against the Zhuge Liang Hermann Prime. So we're beating archers with infantry, hilariously. We go back to the BQ CJ, and we're just cooking. And, you know, like, BQ CJ is, of course, going to do well. Like, BQ anything is going to do well, it seems like, especially in these duels. BQ CJ lost to the Huo Arthur, 41.5 to 36. BQ CJ lost to BQ William, which was kind of interesting, 40.6 to 35. Now, CJ does AoE damage, William does not, but William does do AoE shielding. For what it's worth, he cleanses slows. Like, he doesn't do nothing to his friends, but it's just not the same, okay? As generally prefer the AoE damage, the AoE shielding. So we go on here. We tried CJ with Alex. This also is a case of, like, players want to see it, but there's really no synergy here whatsoever. The only reason Liu Chat has synergy with Alex is the same thing as Philip. Extra sort of combo attacks means you've got more chances to trigger the instant proc damage on the Alex. There's no synergy in that way here with CJ. It's just not performant. 43.8 to 21 against the BQ Liu Chat. We also tried out Pyrrhus, which I would want to run this in the other order. Pyrrhus primary, CJ secondary. In the early game, I think this combination would obviously slap, but it doesn't hang in the end game. I also don't have the museum buff on Pyrrhus active, so that absolutely hurts the performance here. 46.5 to 21.6. Then we tried out Martel. Again, Martel really should be the primary. I didn't have him geared up because I wasn't expecting people to request this, but 45,000 to 19,000 BQ Liu Che cooked. And when I say request this, I did all this in a live stream. So if you're subscribed to the channel, you can enjoy and participate in these live streams and get notifications for when those are happening. We also did CJ and Gorgo, and this did not do well. 44,300 to 25,200. All right. And then we get to these reports that I showed you earlier. And then there's this hilarious thing where people wanted Suleiman. So I did CJ Suleiman, which was, one of the worst reports of the day. Where's the Suleiman rework? Joking. But 47,700 to 16,600. So what is the conclusion here? Okay. What is the conclusion? Well, look, if you're going to use Cavalry in the open field, in my opinion, your best bet is going to be Arthur primary with William secondary or Philip secondary. Okay, depending on where you're putting your Philip. And I can switch this over to Cavalry and leadership to talk about this a little bit, right? Arthur's incredible. Philip is obviously amazing. William is just incredible for the lineup. And the second cavalry army you're going to use is going to be Huo paired with probably Joan. Okay? Depends a lot, again, on the KVK you're in and what commanders you have at your disposal. So one army is Huo with Arthur, I think is your best bet. Skill damage play. Two armies, Arthur William or Philip, and then Huo with William or with Joan, right? Depends on how you're using your Philip. Now, when you get to 3 cavalry armies, this is where I think that Bertrand gets very interesting. So you could do Arthur with Bertrand, you could do Huo with William, and then Nevsky with Joan. And I think that's a pretty solid way to run it, right? 3 cavalry marches. You could make some arguments for some other cavalry commanders, like Attila. I'm, not necessarily convinced, but there's probably some stuff you could do, and depending on how much you overpower your opponents, counterattack can be very disgusting. So, but that's probably the way I would run 3 cavalry marches. This video is really not dedicated to, open field configurations, although I have the most popular series on that, so consider subscribing. I'll be updating that soon. Then for infantry, let's talk about what we're doing, right? Well, I already shared with you, you're going to be using not CJ in the meta situation. Now, he would be a great tide over, right? Just getting into the end game. But you're going to use Ragnar and Skippy. I have this set up the other way for reasons we don't need to get into right now. But Ragnar primary, Skippy secondary. And then you're going to use BQ with Liu Che. All right, and that will be your 2-march configuration. Now, what I'm doing for a 3-march configuration is I use Philip with BQ. I keep my Ragnar Skippy the same. And up top over here, I've got William Wallace with Liu Che. Now, I have a leadership situation going on, which is why I'm running it this way. But if you were running 3 infantry marches, you have a lot of really compelling options, depending on where you want to put your Philip. The Ragnar Skippy is easy. So that's one of your marches locked in, and you just set that aside. Your second march is probably Liu Che with either William Wallace or Alexander the Great. If you're using Wallace, you make him the primary. If you're using Alex, you make Liu Che the primary, right? So there's 2 infantry marches, and that leaves you either BQ with William or BQ with CJ. And CJ does AoE damage. I don't hate it, man. So I would argue that both Bertrand and CJ become super relevant at 3 infantry marches or 3 cavalry marches and would be extremely powerful in the early game. I mean, if you were wondering, are they going to be good in the early game? I apologize for waiting this long to tell you. Yes. The answer is yes. They will be very good in the early game. I did hear, however, in the commander exchange event that you can't exchange them, which means that you are potentially stuck with them in the end game if it actually works that way and continues to be that way. I don't know if that's the case, if that's intended or not. But long story short, I feel like the Bertrand and CJ reworks were incredibly good. And I would be very, very eager to see real open field fighting with Bertrand before I levy full judgment onto how he's performing. Because at the end of the day, Arthur William did terrible in duels, but absolutely slaps in the open field. It's not even a question. So I don't think Bertrand will be nearly as good, but I do think that the synergy is incredibly strong, and I will be really curious to see it. All right. You enjoyed the vid? Throw a like on here, subscribe. And if you want to see the open field testing, I'll have a card in the end screen. You can watch it. Like, it was really cool to see. We go through all the combos, and I'd love for you to join into those streams, and you can experience it all firsthand, all right? Until next time, you have fun smashing your enemies. Take care, everybody.